Okay, so welcome. This is our November Development in Safeguarding Learning event. I can't believe we're rattling through the year and we'll soon be on our last one of 2024. We're going to be looking today at professional curiosity and the understanding of different professional perspectives based on two new pieces of practice guidance that have been developed by the partnership. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kat Morrison. I'm a Policy and Development Officer for North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I'm joined by Hayden Rees-Jones, who's going to be helping in the background if anything comes up on the chat or with any technical issues, which hopefully we won't get. Just a little bit of housekeeping, just for the benefit of everyone really, and so it can help with the recording. We do ask that you mute your microphones and you keep your cameras off. We will have the chat function and there will be a little bit of interaction. There's just one slide where I'm going to ask you to pop some bits in the chat for me, so please be aware of that. I'm always conscious as well that if people do have any questions at the end and don't feel comfortable with that being on the recording, I will always stop the recording and be around at the end of the session as well if anyone wants to catch up with anything without the session being recorded. As always, you can access our presentations via our YouTube channel. So if you just go onto YouTube and search NYSCP, they will come up. This one will probably be up maybe early next week by the time we've got it edited. And if you, while you're on there, it's always easier to just like and subscribe, and then you'll get a notification of any new ones that come up. So obviously we put these on roughly once a month. I will kind of take the attendance from today and send that through to NYS, and then you'll get an email through asking for a post-course questionnaire with some feedback, and then on completion of that you'll get your certificate of attendance. So as I've already said, today's session is really based around the partnership review of two key pieces of practice guidance that have recently been completed, and these are professional curiosity and managing different professional perspectives, and encompassing in that the idea of mutual challenge. It's worth noting that when I'm discussing these documents today, I'm going to be doing it in the context of speaking about children and young people. Obviously, because we're coming from North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, but these were documents that were produced with North Yorkshire Safeguarding Adults Board as well, because the principles remain the same whether you are working with children or adults. As I've already said, I've put the links in the chat, so if it's helpful for you, if it's a way that you like to learn and reflect, you can kind of have them up on a screen while I'm talking through some of the key bits. In terms of the agenda, this is kind of going to how we break down the hour. We're going to look at what is professional curiosity and what some of the barriers are that may prevent us from being professionally curious at certain times. We're going to talk about the importance of culturally competent practice and how we can build that into our professional curiosity as well. And a really important one for me is to kind of incorporate the world of trauma-informed practice and professional curiosity. I'm going to ask us to do a little bit of an exercise. So this is where I'm going to need you to come in on the chat, all exploring this idea of the alternative hypothesis, which we'll get to, which I'll explain, and we can kind of look at in a little bit more detail. And then we're going to move on to the second bit of practice guidance around kind of understanding those different professional perspectives and some of the ideas around mutual challenge and the professional resolutions guidance. I'm going to finish off by touching on some learning from national and local cases. Professional curiosity and mutual challenge come up in nearly every kind of local or national learning review. So I could have picked from many, but I've just picked on some that are kind of recent and relevant to have a look at. Of course, at the end, there will be some time for questions, or if anything comes up in the, please feel free to kind of add it in the chat as we will go along. So I just kind of wanted to start you off with this slide, really. Professional curiosity probably won't come as anything particularly new to a lot of you in the room today. But what I want you to think about is the fact that you've given me, and more importantly, you've given yourself an hour of time. We know how busy everybody is, so to have that hour is a real privilege. And that time is to reflect and think about how professional curiosity fits into our practice and why it's so vital to our practice. And something to kind of really start you thinking, you know, I would imagine I'm sat in a room with a wealth of experience, you know, people who have worked with children and families for a very long time. And I just really like this slide in terms of no matter how many young people you've worked with or cared for, none of them come with an instruction manual. Every child or young person is different. And no matter how many times you've worked with a child or young person, there is a process of learning this child or this family and being professionally curious about this young person or this context. So just something to kind of get you started off with that thinking. So let's start by exploring what it means to be professionally curious. So the Professional Curiosity Practice Guidance is designed for any professional or volunteer who works with children, young people, parents and carers, and as I've already mentioned, adults who may have care and support needs. It's fundamental to how we work with everyone. And in order to work with people effectively, we really need to understand what their life is like from their perspective and their lived experiences. And included in those relationships, when we're talking about professional curiosity, are the relationships we have with other professionals, and really importantly, the relationship we have with ourselves. And this idea and notion of exploring multiple perspectives, you know, people will always come at things from a different angle and have a different understanding of what's going on. And by looking at this and exploring this, we can get a much deeper and richer understanding of what's going on for a family and how we're better able to work together to support them. So looking at kind of some of the skills, professional curiosity really requires professionals to kind of think outside the box about what's happening and going a little bit deeper than what we see just on the surface. It involves really talking and listening to the people that we're working with. And again, that's professionals, children, families, and piecing together those little nuggets of information to form a bigger picture based on the collation of those viewpoints. And this really includes kind of actively seeking wider opinions of the people who are involved with that child or family, the people who know them best. There's a need to kind of ask and explore the second question, not always what's happening, but why. And with this idea comes this, comes the idea of hypothesizing and kind of exploring that why could things be happening, which we'll get to later. A lot around professional curiosity is having a consideration of communication. And when we talk about communication, it's all forms of communication. So how a person talks to you, the words that they may say, but also how a child may play, the behaviours they show, how they interact with the people around them, the body language they present and the non-verbal cues and the tone of their voice. It's important to be aware of the context of where a person is when you're talking to them. Does this have an impact on what they're saying or how they're behaving? And always have a consideration of what's not being said. And then finally, it's about listening to your gut and not dismissing that feeling that we can all get sometimes. I've had it, I'm sure most of the people in this room have had it, where there's something in your gut that doesn't feel right. And professional curiosity is about not letting that go. And it's about kind of reflecting and really thinking about what is giving you that feeling. And then thinking about exploring it and seeking ways to build evidence to either support what you're feeling or reject it. So this is all summarised in quite a nice little video. It's just a really quick 2 minutes one, and it's on the end of our practice guidance, but I thought I would share it with you now.
It's about your eyes and your ears, what you've seen, what you've heard. It involves getting a head start and never answering questions from off the top of your head. It's about being nosy with good intentions and making sure that you see what might be right in front of your nose. Occasionally, it's about sticking your neck out and even sometimes putting your neck on the line. Sometimes there'll be a lump in your throat and you might want to hold your breath. You shouldn't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, but you do have a responsibility to be curious about what's going on around you. It's about really trying to get at what's at the heart of the matter. It's about recognizing when someone is trying to keep you at arm's length and understanding what that's about. It's about understanding what's in your hands and perhaps even using the long arm of the law when you need to. It's about finding your feet in a situation, and it might involve standing your ground. It's about being aware of the toe-curling moments and sometimes taking things one step at a time. It's about the tummy-sinking moments, the butterflies in there, and your gut instinct. It's about listening with your whole body, from the top of your head to the tip of your toes.
So hopefully that just kind of summarises. It's a really nice analogy using the gingerbread man, and it's one you can take back to your teams. It's 2 minutes, and it's a really nice kind of jumping off point for some of those discussions. So the question to ask, I suppose, really is, we know professional curiosity is a fundamental skill, but for time and time again, it's coming up in these learning reviews as something that is missing in some of these cases. So we need to explore what some of the barriers are that is getting in the way sometimes of being professionally curious. So I've just kind of highlighted some of these, and these are covered in the practice guidance as well. And the first one is around this kind of rule of optimism. And this is a term that's gained quite considerable leverage in serious case reviews across the UK. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel will deal with kind of the national reviews of quite serious cases, and they will produce an annual report that examines the thematic learning from all of the serious case reviews that have happened over that last year. One of which that's come out thematically is talking about the rule of optimism. And it occurs when professionals can rationalise escalating risks by perhaps not examining the whole picture and those varying perspectives. And again, you'll see some of this when we start to look at some of the national and local learning from some of the cases later on in the hour. Another barrier to professional curiosity is not seeing the whole picture. And again, this is where professionals may respond to a situation on their own, rather than assessing that situation as part of a bigger picture within the context of that life of that young person or the situation. Normalisation, so this refers to processes where ideas and actions can be seen as normal and become taken for granted or natural in the everyday life of the context of that family. And because they're seen as normal, they also, normal in inverted commas, I want to say, they stop being questioned and they're not recognised or addressed as a potential risk. Professional deference. Now, professionals who have the most contact with an individual or family are in a really good position to recognise when the risks to that person are escalating, going back to that kind of gut feeling that we were talking about earlier on. However, there can be a tendency, and we know that this is part of kind of normal case management, to defer the opinion to that of a manager or a higher status professional who has that limited contact with a person, and who may view the risk as less significant. And this is all about kind of being confident in your own judgment and outlining your observations and your concerns to those professionals, and about being courageous and challenging their opinion of risk if it varies from their own. And we'll move on to that later on when we talk about that kind of understanding and management of different perspectives. Confirmational bias. This is when we look for evidence that supports or confirms our pre-held views. And it's really important to kind of think about those pre-held views. They can be conscious or unconscious, and ignores information that doesn't support that view. So it happens when we filter out potentially useful facts and opinions that don't match our kind of preconceived idea or our kind of single hypothesis of what's going on for that young person or family. And this idea of dealing with safe uncertainty or certainty. So professionals are often presented with concerns that are impossible to substantiate. You know, professionals may often seek out confirmation of certainty, for example, when looking at safety and well-being. But professional curiosity for practitioners really need to understand the relationship between feeling safe and feeling certain, and that the two can be confused. And they're aware that complete certainty can be very, very difficult to attain, and instead work in an area of safe uncertainty where multiple theories are considered with an ongoing curiosity. So I'm aware that I've covered a lot in that slide, but please do feel that you can go back to the practice guidance and it will give you a little bit more detail around each of those possible barriers that you can kind of explore in a bit more detail. I just wanted to touch on culturally competent safeguarding practice. So again, this was taken from the Safeguarding Review Panel as a key area for consideration. With regards to race, cultural identity and ethnicity is not something that's always curiously explored. And we all need to take responsibility for informing our work with sufficient knowledge and understanding to kind of get a clear understanding of what's going on in the context of this family or this young person. I think sometimes there can be a fear or an apprehension when we're talking with families around kind of culture, ethnicity and race, of getting it wrong or being worried about asking questions that may offend a family or a young person. But what I would say to you is, if you don't know, ask. Get a family or young person or a professional or a community to explain what their race, culture, ethnicity means to them and the language that they're using, and mirror that language and understanding, because then you will get a real fuller understanding of their life and their context. And again, this is something that's come out of a local case, which I'll look at a little bit later on, so you can kind of see that come to life a little bit more. I'm going to spend a little bit of time touching on trauma and trauma-informed practice, as I think it fits really nicely with the elements of being professionally curious and developing understanding into why children and family may be behaving in the ways that they are. So for those of you who aren't aware of kind of trauma and trauma-informed practice, the idea of trauma is not something that happens to you. It's what happens inside of you because of what's happened to you, something that may have happened in the past. A trauma-informed approach asks what need is being met by this behaviour, or what danger is being avoided, or what safety is being sought. It's about what's happened to you, not what's wrong with you. I'm not going to show you this video, but again, it's just a really short one that you can take back to your teams around what is trauma. And it's called by someone who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, which again is just a really quick explanation on what trauma is. Often when we talk about trauma, this can go hand in hand with conversations around adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. And there are lots of different traumas or ACEs that can occur in childhood and adulthood. And they can be very short-term events, like an accident or an injury. And some can be long-term, like witnessing or being the victim of abuse, the death of a loved one, living with someone with a mental health issue, or having your own mental health illness. ACEs can include mental health, illness, bullying, witnessing stressful incidents, for example, a robbery or a fire. And when we consider all of these things, think about how many people this can impact. And think about the fact that this can impact so many of the children that we may be working with, but also the parents of the children, the grandparents of the children that we may be working with. They may be dealing with their own elements of trauma, and that may be having an impact on how they feel and how they're displaying those behaviours. Now, we know about the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiences and the correlation of adversity in childhood and the impact this has on life chances and both physical and mental health. And if we start to consider behaviours, and again, when I talk about behaviours, I'm talking about behaviours of the children we work with, the parents and families around them. If we start to consider these with a trauma-informed lens, we can start to be more curious about where these behaviours are coming from and reframe our thinking. And by exploring a different hypothesis of behaviours under a mindset of they can't rather than they won't, it gives us a scope to consider alternative ways to help and support them. So this is kind of summed up in the image on the right of the slide, where we think about kind of reframing the behaviour from won't to can't. And this idea of if someone won't do something, we tend to have a little bit more of a judgmental mindset. We start to talk about kind of rewards and punishments. But if we think about can't, we're a little bit more curious and we start to think about the removal of barriers and supporting and strengthening, which is a very different way of considering things. I'm going to move on to a video again that just kind of sums this up in a much better way than I can. About 6 minutes long. Yes, just 1 second.
And the reality is that most of what I've learned that flies in the face of conventional wisdom can be summed up in a pretty simple phrase. And this is it. Kids do well if they can, which has become the guiding philosophy of our work, the foundation of our work. And when you look at it up here, you probably say to yourself, what's so earth-shattering about that? And on its own, it may not seem particularly earth-shattering, but it actually is, and I want to explain why. See, what kids do well if they can suggests is that if a kid could do well, he would do well. If she could do well, she would do well. And if she's not doing well, something must be standing in her way. And if something's standing in her way, then we all, as the helpers in her life, we need to figure out what's standing in her way so we can help. And I'm sure that sounds like perfect common sense to everybody, because it is. And yet, it flies in the face of conventional wisdom, because the more conventional way of thinking when it comes to challenging behavior is not kids do well if they can. It sounds a lot more like kids do well if they want to. And you see, if you believe kids do well if they want to and a kid's not doing well, so for instance, they're not behaving well, you believe kids do well if they want to, they're not behaving well then you're going to assume the reason he's not behaving well is because he doesn't want to. And if he doesn't want to, then what's all of our jobs? To try to make him want to do well. And while that probably seems like a very narrow, unpleasant, probably pretty ineffective role to play in the lives of these kids, the interesting thing about it is when you think about traditional discipline in our homes, traditional school discipline, discipline in society, it is all oriented around trying to make kids want to do well. Rewards, punishments, timeouts, detention, suspensions, expulsions, you name it, they are all aimed at trying to motivate people to do better, safe in the assumption that they're not doing well because they don't want to. Well, you know what? I don't buy it. What I've learned is it doesn't make any sense. What I've learned is kids do well if they can. I believe kids do well if they can. I believe if a kid could do well, he would do well. And if he's not doing well, you know what? Something has got to be standing in his way. And it cannot be as simple as he just doesn't want to. I also believe that it's high time we learn from more than 50 years of research in the neurosciences that has shown beyond the shadow of a doubt that conventional wisdom is wrong. Now, there are countless examples in our history of where conventional wisdom sticks around a lot longer after it's been disproven. You can go back to something like the world is flat. Well, you know what? We learned it was round, but nobody wanted to part with the idea that it was flat. I think we're going to find the same thing about the notion that kids do well if they want to. All of the research in the neurosciences for the past 50 years has shown beyond the shadow of a doubt that challenging kids do not lack the will to behave well. They lack the skills to behave well. Skills to behave well, what kind of skills am I talking about? I'm talking about skills like problem solving, like flexibility, like frustration tolerance. In other words, what all the research in the neurosciences has shown us is that kids who exhibit chronic challenging behavior, you know what? They have like a learning disability, except instead of areas like reading, math, and writing, this learning disability is in areas like problem solving, flexibility, frustration tolerance. I think it's actually a very accurate, apt, and powerful analogy. And here's why. I'm in my mid-40s. If we went back to when I was in elementary school, actually not far from here, if there was a child who was reading several grade levels behind his peers, back then, well-meaning, empathic, caring educators would not have said to themselves, I wonder if he has a learning disability. I wonder if he's got dyslexia. I wonder if he has a hard time phonetically decoding words. No, actually 40 years ago, those folks would have said, I wonder if he is either dumb or lazy.
Hello, workers. Another long day at the office. Boss being a meanie.
And I know that there are people sitting here listening right now who can attest to the personal pain of that, to being the child in the classroom who ironically was trying harder than anybody else in that classroom to read and was completely misunderstood. You know what's interesting about that? Guess who wasn't trying very hard in that classroom to read? The students to whom it came naturally. Guess who was trying harder than anybody else? The very kids that we used to think were lazy. What a terrible shame. Thank goodness we have come a long way since then, but not when it comes to kids with challenging behavior. Here's a little bit of a news flash. You know those good kids, those kids we say, they're so compliant, they do what we want, they're such good kids. You know what? They get so many kudos for their great behavior, and they don't even deserve them. You know why they don't deserve them? Because they're not even trying very hard. It just comes naturally to them. Guess who's trying inordinately hard to behave themselves during the course of the day? The very kids we're trying to motivate to behave better. A very wise man who has taught me a lot in his lifetime. He's in his 98th year now, my grandfather. He's taught me a lot. One of the things he taught me early on is he said, when you give a dog a name, eventually they will answer to it. And I have learned that if you treat kids like they are lazy, unmotivated, don't care, aren't trying hard enough over time, don't be surprised when they start to look like, talk like, and act like they don't care and aren't trying hard enough. And you know what? I don't believe it. I believe kids do well if they can. I have yet to meet the kid that prefers doing poorly to doing well. I believe kids do well if they can.
I'll pause that there. It does go on. If you want to make use and watch the whole video, the link will be on the slide, so you will be able to access it a little bit later on. So just to kind of sum up, the trauma-informed approach is one that sees that every behaviour, thought or feeling following trauma is either a natural and reasonable response to what's happened or a coping strategy that that person has learned to manage that event. It's not a mental disorder or an illness or something that is wrong with that person. And this idea, it fits so nicely with professional curiosity because it's this idea of identifying underlying needs that are being expressed by a behaviour, rather than just looking solely at the behaviour itself. At a micro level, we can begin to engage with trauma-informed practice by treating everyone with kindness and listening with curiosity and compassion, and to curiously explore in order to make sense of and understand who they are, making sense of the things that has happened to them and how this may affect them so that they can fully get on with all aspects of their lives. So just to kind of sum up some of the stuff around kind of professional curiosity and from a little bit around kind of trauma-informed practice, we're going to do a quick exercise which will help us get to consider this idea of multiple hypotheses, and the idea, most importantly, that there can be more than one hypothesis that is correct, rather than the notion that it's one or the other. It can be both or many. And this is an activity that you can go back and do with your teams and your colleagues if you are particularly stuck, if you're working with a family or young person and you really can't get to the crux of that understanding of that behaviour, you can go back and do this and really consider all those different perspectives around kind of what people are thinking and exploring different ideas. So what we do is we consider a behaviour. We think about really exploring what that looks like. You use those professionally curious skills, thinking about when it happens, what does it look like, what does it feel like, what does it sound like. So let's use the example that we have a child who doesn't want to go to school. And as a group of professionals, we can hypothesize based on what we know. Remember, we all may know different things about that young person, about why that behaviour may be happening. So let's have a go. What I want you to do really quickly in the chat is to just put a few random hypotheses or ideas about why a child may not want to go to school, and just pop them in the chat now as we go. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Doesn't want to do a specific lesson. They may be being bullied. They may have separation anxiety. Yeah. Friendship troubles, unkind children. Yeah, absolutely. Fear. Oh, they're all coming a bit thick and fast. Worried about a family member who's unwell, struggling with the work, worried about how parents are at home, domestic abuse, worried about stuff at home, not getting on with the teacher, they missed any off, bullied, anxious, struggling with the work, tired. Yeah, absolutely. So loads of different responses to kind of hypothesize why that young person may be displaying that particular behaviour. And it's easy sometimes when we look at that behaviour that one of those hypotheses may just be because they don't want to go. But when we've got that answer, I think it's important to go a little bit deeper and to explore why they don't want to go, whether there's particular days, whether there's particular patterns, etc. But none of you have kind of covered that off on this time, so which is really interesting. But by being curious about the why rather than the what, you can see that our responses to what is happening to that young person and why they're not going to school will be radically different and will have different levels of impact. So if you've got a young person who's being bullied or is a young carer, those responses will be very different. So you can see now why kind of having that exploration of different hypotheses as to why that behaviour may be happening is really important to kind of then shape your response to that behaviour. Someone's popped in the chat again that there may be neurodivergent needs, so that young person may have a diagnosis of ADHD or autistic spectrum disorder or a wide variety of additional needs. Absolutely, that can be very much a reason why a young person is not wanting to attend school. But the importance here is to also consider alternative hypotheses as well. That there may be additional issues alongside those neurodivergent needs. Again, there may be issues with bullying. They may feel particularly challenged in a lesson or with a particular teacher, and that again will shape that response. And again, considering the effect of whether there may be a traumatic event in that child's life. You know, a lot of you have already said they might not want to leave home. Something might be going on at home that they're dealing with. They might be tired because they've been kept up all night worrying about something or hearing something that they don't want to hear. So considering the effect of trauma on a child's life and how this may be displayed if that child is feeling perhaps dysregulated or unsafe, that can have a huge impact on our response. So hopefully it's a really quick exercise, but hopefully it's quite an impactful one that can just kind of bring to life a little bit this idea of considering different reasons why people may be displaying particular behaviours. So we're going to move on now to our second piece of practice guidance, which follows on and really should be read in conjunction with professional curiosity. And it's this idea of understanding and managing different professional perspectives and mutual challenge. Now, this includes the professional resolutions guide, which we will get to in one of the final slides. So This guide aims to support practitioners, professionals and volunteers with an effective means of exploring different professional perspectives, addressing different opinions, and is supportive of professional and respectful challenge. The ultimate aim of this document, and basically everything that I'm saying to you over the next hour, is we want you to see challenge and the exploration of different perspectives as a positive. And it's positive because it places what is best for that child or adult as the primary focus. It's okay to see things from a different perspective, and having different ideas based on our own knowledge and understanding and our own context really kind of helps develop that picture. And this idea that there isn't a correct answer, but we're looking from different perspectives, and both may be right. So you look at the picture on the left, you've got someone looking at it from one perspective who's telling us it's a 6. You've got someone else looking at it from a completely different perspective who's telling it it's a 9. They both think they're right. They're both right. They're both just looking at it from a different context, and they're seeing a whole picture together. The middle image, we can see a visual representation of the need to understand where people are coming from and their own pressures. So, for example, the woman in the picture, from her perspective, she may be wondering why that man is not just pulling her up and helping her, but she doesn't see the context, the challenges he faces in his context, i.e. the massive boulder that's pinning him down. And the beach ball is my favourite analogy for looking at this. So we will move on to that again. I'm relying on a video to explain it much better than I can. This one is very quick.
The principle of the beach ball is one of the most powerful principles on perspective taking that you can bring into a facilitation. Imagine that there was a beach ball in the center of the room. Based on my perspective, my senses, my expertise, my experience, everything that I am is telling me that this beach ball is red. So what's the first thing that someone on the other side of the room thinks when they hear me say that? That I'm wrong. How could that possibly be? From their perspective, the beach ball is clearly blue. The principle of the beach ball tells us to hold the space for all perspectives. No one can see an entire beach ball from one perspective. That's impossible. What we're going to be working on today will be a lot more ambiguous than a beach ball. No one will have the one perfect perspective. There's no such thing. Trust in your colleagues that when they share what they share, they're giving you a glimpse of their perspective. And challenge yourself to say, how might all these perspectives be true? By bringing in all perspectives, we get a clearer picture of the whole.
Okay, that's one of my favourite analogies. So again, one you can kind of take back and share with teams. For me, it's the best way of kind of explaining that idea of multiple perspectives and kind of seeing your piece of the picture in the whole puzzle or beach ball, really. So I just want to touch on working together to safeguard children. Obviously, we had the new iteration that came out at the back end of 2023, and it references that strong multi-agency and multidisciplinary working is vital to identifying and responding to the needs of children and families. And it highlights in the expectations developed to underpin this multi-agency working, and calls on those who are involved with direct practice to demonstrate mutual challenge, where practitioners challenge themselves and each other and question each other's assumptions and seek to resolve differences of opinions in a restorative and respectful way. So there may be times when, through exploring different professional perspectives, there are differences of opinions, disagreements, and levels of challenge. And embedding a positive culture of mutual challenge within and between professional providers provides us with an opportunity to learn from one another, and often takes a wider view of multiple perspectives, which is fundamental to effective partnership working. It's important to note that the safety and well-being of anyone who's being supported by an agency or organisation, be that a child, young person, family or adult with care and support needs, must always be the paramount consideration. And professional differences of a perspective must not distract from timely and clear decision making based on safeguarding that family or young person. It is the responsibility of all practitioners to act assertively and proactively to initiate a challenge to perspectives, be that around actions, inactions, or the decisions made by other agencies. Do not wait to be approached. And I would say, do not wait to be to hear it from someone else. If you've had that feeling in your gut, be brave, be courageous, and be the one that says it. I speak from an example. Yesterday I was in quite a hard meeting, and there was something kind of in the room. There was an unsaid thing that was in the room, and someone was brave and they put their hand up and they said, this is sitting really uncomfortably with me, and they put themselves in quite a vulnerable situation by explaining that. But by doing so, that feeling was then echoed by about 4 or 5 other people in the room, and it took one person being brave, being courageous, and just saying, this doesn't quite sit right with me. And you'll be surprised if you do that people will often kind of think, actually, you're right, this doesn't quite sit right, let's explore it a little bit deeper. When we talk about differences of opinion, we know that they can occur for various reasons. So in relation to the actions or inactions of another professional, a difference of opinion as to whether a particular agency may need to be involved when supporting a family, when there are differences of opinion as to whether the threshold for support offered to that children or family is being met. And I think I've just put in this quote mark here. Someone shared with me that we all chose, everyone in this room or this virtual room, chose the professions that we did for a reason. We didn't choose to be lawyers or chefs or bricklayers or electricians. We chose a position and a role that is based around help and support. And we are all coming from a position of wanting what we feel is best for that child or family. It's okay that we have differences of opinions on this, and by raising it, it means we're having really important discussions about what is best for that child or family from a multi-agency perspective, which is only ever going to ultimately give us the best outcome. So when we feel there is a need for challenge or a difference of opinion, and you want to raise that, and you want to raise that in a kind of a positive and proactive way, consider the following really. Before you have those conversations, if you can, plan in advance what you want to say and the points that you want to get across. Be prepared to share the evidence that you've gathered to back up those opinions based on your own professional curiosity. And consider what you want the outcome of the discussion to be. Remembering primarily it's not about who's right or wrong, but about exploring the different perspectives to get that fuller understanding. And be prepared to listen to the views and opinions of the person you are having the conversation with. Consider why they have a different perspective. From what context does this come from, and from what evidence have they gathered to build it? When you're having the conversation, ensure that the focus and outcome of the conversation remains solely on the best outcomes for the child or adult, always considering what the views are of that child or family. Be mindful of the language and the words that you're using. So remain non-confrontational. It's not about laying blame or considering different perspectives being right or wrong. It's about showing empathy, consideration, compassion. Be real and honest. Share if you've got a gut feeling and why you have it. And this idea of kind of demonstrating congruence, making sure your tone and your body language and your speech are consistent and empathic. Don't be afraid to ask the obvious to gain a deeper understanding of the perspective of the person you're speaking with. Keep an open mind. Remain professionally curious in the conversation. Is there anything more you both need to do to find out or to support your thinking? Could there be an agreed perspective or an alternative perspective or hypotheses that you could both consider? And agree on an outcome or actions. Now, it may be that this is to agree to disagree at this time, and you may need to go and both kind of build further pieces of evidence and progress the conversation through to the professional resolutions process, which I'll get onto in the next slide. And again, afterwards, make sure you record your discussions and conclusions, follow up on any actions or information you need, or gather up any of that additional information as a result of the conversation. And importantly, take some time to reflect on the conversation and what you've learned, and that can help you take forward into further practice. Now, it's vital when we consider disagreements or differences of perspectives that these are not allowed to adversely affect the outcomes for the child. If differences cannot be resolved at that practitioner level through those kind of initial discussions, there is a protocol that can be followed to manage the disagreements and reach the best outcomes. It follows 7 steps, which I've outlined briefly on the slide, and the full process can be accessed on the practice guidance document. It's important to note that if disagreements are raised in relation to learning or changes that need to be made to any particular practice or protocols, this would come through to the partnership, and we would discuss this at subgroup level, and we would implement that or kind of update any practice guidance or documents. I'm not going to go into massive amounts of detail on this resolutions pathway because it is in the practice guidance, and it's just that awareness that it's there for you and there is a process if it does get to that point. So just for the last 10 minutes or so, I'm going to touch on some national and local learning from serious cases. It's really important because it highlights why professional curiosity and understanding and challenging different perspectives is so valid and important. And it's a recurring theme that comes up in most cases considered locally and nationally. Now, it's never nice to think about when a child has been seriously hurt or sadly died as a result of abuse, but we owe it to these children to learn from what's happened to them so we can implement changes to try to prevent similar things happening again. But remember to take care. Look after yourself. If you are finding it hard to hear what I'm saying in terms of what's happened to these children, and I'm not going to be going into any specific detail, I'm just going to touch on the very basics of what's happened. Please do what you need to do to make yourself feel safe and comfortable. Go and make yourself a cup of tea or have a break from the screen. It's absolutely fine. So first of all, I'm going to touch on Arthur Libinjo Hughes and Star Hobson. Arthur was 6, Star was 16 months old, and they were both murdered in 2020 as a result of sustained abuse and neglect by their caregivers. So as a result of their murders, there was a national review. This was initiated to understand what happened to these children during their very short lives and how agencies acted to safeguard them and whether their tragic deaths were representative of wider national issues. So in 2022, the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel released the Child Protection in England document. And this review set out recommendations and findings for national government and local safeguarding partners to protect children at risk of serious harm. And it examines the circumstances leading up to the deaths of Arthur and Star and considers whether their murders reflect those wider national issues in child protection. I'm not going to go into the full learning from these tragic deaths, but I just wanted to highlight some of the key points in relation to professional curiosity and challenge. There is a link on the bottom of this page. We did do a lot of learning around this document about a year, 18 months ago, and we did do a full recorded learning event that you can access as well. But again, with relation to the Child Protection in England document, there were some key points that were raised around assessments being optimistic and lacking professional curiosity. There wasn't the testing out and the building of evidence around the parents self-reporting and not considering the wider networks of adults around the household. There was a consideration of a single story, which was what the parents were saying what was happening. There was a lack of critical thinking and challenge with and between agencies. Uncovering what happened required greater challenge rather than the self-reported explanations of the parents and partners. Having the opportunity for multi-agency meetings was needed, where professionals challenged and explored each other's perspectives and explored multiple hypotheses. With the full range of evidence in front of them, it would have provided a better opportunity to get to the bottom of what was happening. And it stated that practitioners needed to be confident working with diverse communities and to be supported and challenged through supervision to reflect on these issues. Goes back to what I was saying around some of that culturally competent practice as well. So moving on to a couple of local cases. And when serious case reviews are completed as a partnership, it's really important to share learning as much as possible. So again, the idea is that we learn from this, we pick up themes and trends to hopefully prevent similar things happening again. Child X was a recent, quite complex safeguarding practice review, or SPRIG, case. And I won't go into a lot of details, but just to kind of put it in context for you, it refers to a 6-year-old child whose parent was in a polyamorous relationship with 2 transgender adults. Child X had previously resided with grandparents out of the area. Child X's parent made an unplanned move to North Yorkshire with the 2 adults who they'd met via social media. This was the parents' first time having responsibility for Child X, and they were a significant distance away from grandparents, and they were considered vulnerable, so they were open to services. And sadly, it transpired that Child X received quite significant injuries as a result of abuse in the household, highlighted in bruises and marks. So there was a lot of learning that came out of this case, and some quite key themes around professional curiosity, one of which was in relation to Child X was displaying some challenging behaviours, and these behaviours were put down in assessment to a possible neurodiversity. No consideration was given as to whether these could be due to trauma or whether there was any emotional neglect. And again, it boils down to this idea of the consideration of multiple hypotheses. This young person may have a neurodiversity, absolutely, and this may have impacted on some of that behaviour. But if trauma had been considered, would there be different outcomes that had been explored for that child? Another thing to consider is there were 3 adults in our household who Child X referred to as Dad. The assessments carried out focused on the biological parent, so the risk relating to the other adults was not included in the safety planning. And again, how was the perspectives from others in the household explored or not explored in this case? And how did that affect the understanding of the whole picture? Again, it's that kind of building, being curious, looking at different perspectives. There was also some learning around who the child was referring to when they were speaking about Dad. And this was not explored, possibly because there was some concerns around exploring that language with a transgender parent. And it goes back to that slide that I mentioned earlier about if in doubt, ask the person that you are speaking with. If you are not sure the right language, the right terminology, ask, and they will tell you, and then you know how to say it or what to do that's correct. When we were looking at this case, we saw that Child X's voice was not always captured, and there wasn't really that consideration about the behaviours that were being displayed, and this idea of kind of seeking opportunities to see the child in places where they have a freedom to speak, and if there's challenges with a young person speaking or communicating, using appropriate tools and support to support with that communication, so we can get that understanding of the lived experience. So that includes both a child's voice, but if you can't get that child's voice for whatever reason, if they are unable to communicate with you in one way or another, exploring that child's voice through other means, looking at their behaviours and how they're acting and what they're not saying. There's a couple more. I'm just going to touch on one because I think we're going to run over. But Child V was a 4-month-old baby who sadly died while sharing a bed with their parents. At the time of their death, Child V was subject to a child protection plan for concerns regarding historical substance use, domestic abuse, and risks posed in relation to the parents' wider family. It was noted that both parents had experienced significant challenges through their own childhood. So again, that exploration of kind of intergenerational trauma. Safe sleep messages were delivered at several points to both parents. However, these were not tailored to the parents' needs, and there was no curiosity around the context of that family and how the messages were being understood. So, for example, at the time there was some quite significant renovation work that was happening in the property, but no one was professionally curious to explore what this meant for the family and what this meant for the baby's sleeping arrangements. So there was this idea of, well, we've told them about the safe sleeping messages, which we all know, but the professional curiosity and that understanding of what was going on would have led to more of a conversational based discussion, which would hopefully have then led to the family sharing some of those challenges around the fact that there was a lot of things happening in the house which was leading to the baby co-sleeping. And we know that that's led to some of our campaign work around the Ask Me work, which obviously we have lots of resources on our website. If you want, we can pop the link in the chat for that one. Child Y and sibling Z, I won't go through the details because I know we're very close to 1 o'clock, but again, this was very similar in that there was this lack of kind of multiple hypotheses around some of the behaviours that were displayed, particularly around the older sibling, and exploring some of that context of the challenges that the parent was facing around sort of persistent crying in baby. So an interesting one to look at. With all of these, we do have 7-point briefings that are on our website, so you can look at them in a little bit more detail. This was just some of the things that have come out of our recent audits. We've looked at child exploitation and we've looked at responses to children who have been suspended or excluded from school. Lots of working wells, lots of kind of things to be focusing on, but it nearly always comes out. Areas for development, professional curiosity, especially around child exploitation and early indicators, and again what that behaviour means, and that consideration of it might be a sign of potential exploitation. And when we're looking at children who've been suspended or excluded from schools, the area for development was around that consideration of alternative hypotheses. So often we will see young people who are displaying these challenging behaviours, and what we see in the assessments is that they are, we're waiting on an ADHD assessment or an ASD assessment, or that idea of recognising a neurodiversity, which absolutely that young person may have, but there needs to be a consideration of an alternative hypothesis as well for some of that behaviour, some of which may be trauma. But it's not all negative. I know I've touched on some of the negatives there, but I wanted to kind of finish on a really positive one, and this idea that sometimes all it takes is one question, one idea, one thought of curiosity. We had a recent example where we had a young person who presented at hospital in drink, who was clearly intoxicated, and the doctor was curious. The doctor could have just treated this young person and then sent them home, but they asked about what happened, where they'd got the drink from, why they'd had it, and this young person shared a location where they'd been told that young people were meeting and they were being offered drink for free by a particular shopkeeper. This doctor then shared that information with health professionals. He spoke to Children and Family Service and police. And off the back of that, we had the shopkeeper was arrested, and he was later adopted as a perpetrator of exploitation. The site was closed. Based on the information gathered and the partnership working through our MAZE platforms, we identified a significant amount of young people who were also attending this shop and who were at risk of exploitation. And they were all kind of brought in and supported. And we did a lot of general awareness raising in local schools. And that's from one question. One person who didn't have to ask that question. We hoped that they did, and it's amazing that they did. But if they hadn't, think about kind of what the outcome of that could have potentially been. So to finish off, and again, take this slide home back with you, mull over it with your teams. A couple of questions to consider. Do we walk in the shoes of people to consider the situation from their perspective? Do we build those relationships to enable the sharing of information? Do we consider and test out those multiple hypotheses? Do we consider and challenge our own thinking? Do we actively seek out multiple perspectives and share our own? Are we brave? And do you know who you can go to talk through your own curiosities and what support you do receive? That's the end of the slides in relation to professional curiosity and understanding different perspectives. Just our final slides, as always, with our QRs that will take you to our practice guidance and training. As I said, I put the links in the chat for the guidance for you to access. We've got a couple of upcoming sessions that we would like you to join if you are able to. On the 13th of November, we've got our first practitioner forum, which is just an opportunity for frontline practitioners to come together and have a little bit of a discussion about how we can consult with some of our development of ongoing strategies and pieces of work. Really key one on the 4th of December. Please note this is an extended 2-hour session, but we're really going to get into the crux of working together 2023 and what this means for North Yorkshire and all of our multi-agency safeguarding arrangements. In January, we have our Growing Up in North Yorkshire survey results that will be shared. And the 15th of January, for those of you who were down to attend our October session that was sadly cancelled, we've rearranged the young people and vaping session. You will need to go back on and rebook. And then on the 5th of February, we will be doing a session on parental conflict. That is it from me. These are our key links. As always, I'm around. I'm going to stop the recording now, but if anyone's got any questions, please do stay on and have a chat with me after the recording. Thank you very much, everyone.